All right, we've been using Scanner to get an input from the keyboard, pretty much allowing the programs to read data directly from the user. How about getting an input from a file? That's what we're going to be working on today. Two things to focus: reading from a text file and printing or writing to a text file. So here is a learning goal for you. So you'll understand how to read a file input and how to write to a file. And you're going to be able to write a simple program that reads a text file and also prints to a text file. Let's take a look at how to create a program that reads a text file. There are a couple things that you must add to your program. So this is these two apply to any program that requires file reading or file writing. The first thing is the import java.io.asterisk. So this is pretty much a package that you are importing. So recall how you imported scanner class to be able to use scanner. We're also importing this IO package. That asterisk pretty much means that everything in the IO package. So this will allow us to import buffer reader, which is responsible for reading a file, and also file reader, that's also responsible for locating the file. So we need both of them to be able to read a file in our program. And then once we get to writing to a file, we also need the package print writer and file writer. Okay, so that's why we need to import multiple different classes, and they are all in the same package IO. So by doing this, by typing java.io.asterisk, it will allow us to import everything in the IO package. All right, so that's the first thing that you're gonna add in the very first line. And then in the main method, just make sure that you type in throws IO exception. So this is just pretty much saying if there isn't any issue reading a file or file opening, just basically throw an exception or an error. So the program will be stopped working. So this will be the case where file cannot be located, but you're trying to, or your program is trying to open that file. Then obviously an error will occur and it will throw IO exception. Okay, so these two are a must. And let's take a look at line by line on what to do on reading a file. The very first thing that you will do is creating buffered reader object. So this object will allow us to read file. So this is responsible for reading a file. And file reader object is the one that's responsible for locating the file. So file reader will look for that file that's named as myfile.txt, and then it's gonna give or hand it over to buffer reader. So the buffer reader will take care of the rest. And how do you do that? You can do it in two lines. So creating buffer reader object is pretty much the same as creating scanner object, what we did, starting with the buffer reader in the beginning, and then write down the variable name for the buffer reader. So we're using input for the variable name, and that buffer reader input is going to take the location of the file from the file reader. All right. So these must be done in order to read the file. And make sure that your file that you're trying to read is in the same directory as your program file. The second thing that you want to do, so all the setup is done. Now it's time to read. There is a method read line. Very similar to scanner, where there is a method called next line to read user typed input. Read line is responsible for reading a line in the text file. So we're going to be using this method to read a file. And then something that you need to understand is that this method will only read one line in the text file. So therefore, if you're trying to read everything in the text file, which has more than one line, you gotta keep on calling this method until you read the last line of the text file. So we're gonna be using repetition structure for that. So when you call read line, it will read the first line. And when you call read line again, it's going to read the second line of the text. I'll show you an example of this. So read line method is a method that belongs to buffer reader. So remember, this is a method that's not defined in your class, it's defined in the buffer reader. Therefore, we have to use a buffer reader object, which is input. That's the name of the buffer reader object that we're using. We have to use the name of the object and then dot and method. So this dot kind of allows us to use the read line method from the input, which is a buffer reader. And because the readLine method will return a string value, so pretty much the first line in the text is going to be read and it will be stored as a string value. So that's why we are storing this value into the string variable called myString. And then now if you print myString, you should be able to see the very first line of the text file. And then the last thing that you want to do once you're done, like dealing with all the reading line from the text file, make sure that you call close to prevent from resource leaking. So this is pretty much similar to scanner close. Okay, so now let's take a look at how to print to a text file. The structure is pretty much similar to reading from a text file. We have two lines, but we have two different classes that we're using. Print writer is responsible for printing or writing to a file. File writer, which is inside of the print writer here, is responsible for creating a text file. So what's happening in the highlighted section over here is that we are creating print writer output instance or object. So once again, this is something that we need to be able to access the print or write to a file method. And then we are also creating a file writer object inside the print writer. So pretty much what we're doing is we're passing this into the print writer. So let me just put it into simpler term. The file writer, since it's responsible for creating a file, so here we are putting the name of the file that you want to save as output file.txt. So we're telling, hey, file writer, I want to create a text file that's called output file.txt. Can you make one? So file writer will make one. And then once it make one, it will tell the print writer, hey, I made a file output file.txt. So you can use this to print a text to the file. So the print writer will actually print or write to a file. So let's take a look at the line number 6 here. So notice how we're using the method println. Println is a method that we've been using a lot in processing and also using for system out. And then this is used for output, which is a print writer object. So this println belongs to the output, so we have to use this output dot. Otherwise, it's not going to be printing to a file. Okay, so this will be a method that you call to print this text into the file that's called output file.txt. And then don't forget to close the output. So whenever you open a input or output stream, so make sure that you always close at the end. All right, so this is an example code to read all lines from a text file. So let's say you have a text file that has 3 lines, so technically more than one line. How do you read all of them? Because read line will only allow us to read one single line. Okay, so here I have an example. The first 2 lines are the same as the previous example. And then let's take a look at the line number 8. which is a string my string equal to input.readline. This is also same as the previous example. But I have a while loop here, which is a repetition structure. So remember how this is only going to read one line. So let me write down the steps for you. Okay, so when this is called input read line, the first line is going to be stored in the variable myString. So one dot first line dot will be stored in myString. Okay. And the next line, we're declaring a variable int variable line count. So this will be used to count how many lines we're reading. Initially, it's set to 0. And then we encounter the while loop. My string is currently not null. Null means empty. It has a value one dot first line. So therefore, this is true, and it's gonna go to the next line. So the line count now will become 1, right? Because we are incrementing the value by 1. And system out.println will print this message on console. So once again, this is a method that belongs to system out. So this will print the message on console. Line count has been updated to 1, and then we have a space. My string is 1 dot first line, so that will be printed on console. Okay, and the next line, we're assigning a new value to my string. So this line, whenever there's an assign operator, your program will perform the task on the right hand side first. So input.readLine means it's reading the second line. So 2 dot second line dot, it will be read, and then that's going to be saved in my string. And it goes back to the condition again. So my string is not null, so it's true, right? It has a second line value there. So therefore, it's going to run this again. Line count will now become 2. And then the next line that will be printed on console will be 2 space and my string number 2, line number 2, second line. And then goes to the next line, and it's going to read the third line. So once it reads the third line, it will save that value into my string. So my string is a variable, a container. It can be assigned to a new value, and it goes back to the condition again. Still, it's not null. There's something there, so it's true. It goes to line count. It becomes 3. System out print line count, which is 3, and the third line, my string will be printed. And then when the next line is called again, read line, oh, there's nothing there. So pretty much my string will become, so my string become null, nothing, null. Okay, so this becomes false. So therefore, this will break out of the loop and then goes to the code that's outside of the loop here. Okay, so that will allow us to read every line in the text file. Okay, so now let's take a look at an example. All right, so let's create a program that reads a text file. And make sure that your text file that you want to read from is saved in the same folder as your class file. Okay, so I have my class file created. And the first thing that you want to add is import java.io package. This is the very first thing that you want to do. And then the second thing is throws IO exception. So this is responsible for throwing an error when there isn't any issue with reading a file. Okay. And then now what we want to do is we want to create buffered reader. And I'm going to call it input. And you can do this in one single line or 2 lines. Let's just do it in 2 lines. Declaring the variable for the buffer reader object. And then input new buffer reader, open bracket. So this is how we are creating a buffer reader object. So buffer reader object will allow us to use a method within the buffer reader. Okay. And then, but one thing that we need to pass to the buffer reader when we are creating the object, is that file reader object. So whenever we are creating an object, you see how we're starting with the keyword new. So just recognize the pattern. So file reader, and then in the file reader, we're gonna put down the name of the txt file that we want to read from. So we're gonna put my file txt. It has to be within a quotation, so make sure that you put quotation there and semicolon. And it has to spell exactly the same way, with all capital, lowercase, the same. Okay. Now we're going to use a method from the buffer reader to read a line from my file. So remember, read line is the method that we're going to be using to read the first line. And once we read the first line, we need to have a variable to store that value. So we're going to be creating a string value, my string. So this will be saved there. And then let's print out the string, print out, println, my string. Don't forget to close your input. Alright, so let's run this. There you go. So look at console here. I'm looking at my first line, which is the first line of my text file. So we are able to read the first line. If you're getting an error, probably it's because you haven't actually put these two, or you don't have the text file within the same folder. It has to be in the same folder. Okay? And then now, why don't we look into how to create a file or print to a file? So that's responsible for reading a file. I'm going to put everything inside of the comment. If you want to comment multiple different lines, we can start with slash with asterisk, and we can end with the asterisk and slash. So that's used for multiple lines of comments. All right, we're going to use a print writer this time. Okay, print writer. We're going to create the object print writer output. We're going to do it in two lines. So first line is for declaration of the variable, and the new print writer. Print writer, once again, is responsible for writing to a text file. And then in the bracket, what we're going to put is the file writer object. Okay. So this print writer object knows how to print to a text file, but it doesn't know how to create a text file. So new file writer will be responsible for creating a text file. And I'm gonna say my output file txt. Okay, so this is something that we don't have so far. We are going to be creating it. Okay, and then now the method that you can call output println. This is the first line of the text file in semicolon and output close. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, seems like nothing has happened. Well, no errors happened, so that's good. I'm gonna look into my folder. So here you go. Here's my test folder here, which is this project folder. So if I click on it, I see my output file txt. So let me click on it. You see, this is the first line of the text file that we created. So there you go. You get to create a text file using print writer and the file writer. All right. So once again, for those of you who are still confused on Why are you using like two things? Can we just not use one thing? Um, there are steps, okay? There are a lot of steps in programming. So in this case, the steps required for reading or writing to a file is that we need to create a file and we need to print to a file. There's two steps required and two different objects are responsible for those two tasks. Okay? Now, let's take a look at reading all lines from the text file. So we initially uh, read the first line of the text. Now we're gonna read the entire one. Okay, so that's what we're gonna be working on. Okay, I'm just gonna put this. I'm just gonna delete this. We don't need the print writer anymore. And then we're gonna continue with the what we had earlier. And before we close, so closing will happen after we are finished using input. Okay, and what we're gonna do, I'm just gonna delete this too. I'm gonna keep this line. This is a line that reads the first line. If I call um, my string, so string is already defined. So if I call this method again, so I'm just calling this method and then saving it in the same variable. Oh, I should not have deleted system out println my string. So let's just see what happens here, okay? Oh, it's the second line. Okay, so what happened here is that when the first time read line is called, it reads the first line here, but when it's called again, it reads the second line, and then that will be stored in the variable myString. So that's why you're seeing second line here when you print it, because that variable stores the second line. Now we want to print every line. So this is what we're gonna do. We're going to be using while loop. There is a lot of other solutions possible. So what this is just one single solution. So since we read my string, the first line, we're going to have some value in it. So it's not going to be null. Right? We open brackets for while loop. And I am going to put these in here. So the first line is read. And then I'm going to print out my string and then read the second line. Okay, and then once that's done, it checks for the condition again. This is true. Print out my next line and read the one that's after this. And then go back. So it will keep on running until it is fully read and nothing is saved in my string. Okay? Alright, so let's run this. All of the lines are printed. Okay, so that's a way to read everything from the line and printing everything in the text file. Notice that print method is also called inside of the while loop, so that it keeps on printing after saving the new line into the variable myString. Okay, so that's it for today's lesson. Make sure that you review everything. Let me know if you have any questions.